we have another interesting person today. We had an opportunity previously for a brief interview with her, Neha, who, unlike many, went from a very traditional course of engineering, a set path, if you will, to something out of the ordinary. And that is towards dance movement science. And dance movement science is a subsect or a part of the overall human movement science. The body moves in a particular way. The 206 bones, 640 muscles, thousands of nerve endings trigger or not trigger the body movements that we experience. Walking, sitting cross-legged, squatting, jumping, running, dancing, for that matter. So we have someone like that today, and she has brought in a very interesting angle towards mobility for normal people who are non-dancers, but more specifically to dancers. And why this is of a peculiar interest is much of Indian culture has been a form of expression. When we go back to what our culture has been, our music, our dance, our stories, a lot of our knowledge and mythology and what India has been all through this transmissible knowledge of either stories, music, and dance. So what is in particular interesting here is that our dance forms in India are very old, or very traditional. Old in the sense that historic, not outdated. And people have been doing it for, I don't know, maybe thousands of years even, or hundreds of years for sure. And there has been a certain celebration of this kind of performance. And when I say celebration, there is a ritual behind it. There is a preparation for it, a preparation for the dance itself. There is years of hard work. And given India's context historically as to how was dance performed, when was it going to be performed, and how were people trained, that in itself is another chapter. That in itself is quite fascinating. But that may not be the remit of today's discussion. So, without further ado, welcome, Neha.
Thank you, Sudarshan.
And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Certainly. So you know this whole, so the body moves. And the human body is made to move. But we see certain forms of movement, and we call that dance. And in some cultures, it expresses, such as ours, it expresses certain emotions, it tells a story, or maybe the whole dance sequence is a story in itself. It's the pleading, it's the fear, it's the excitement, it's the yearning. And we do this through hand movements, eye expression, facial positioning, body positioning. Then we see dance, like there was these dance movies that you saw in early 2000s, right? And like all this break dance and this dance and that dance, where I was hard pressed to see what exactly the expression was. But of course, I was marveled by the human body to move like that without snapping or without breaking. So take me through when we say dance movement science. Is that any different from human movement science? Or is there some specific aspect of movement that is relevant to dance?
Right. So dance science is a subsect of human movement science. Let's put it that way. It's not different from it, but it's more than just movement, as in day-to-day movement. Like how sports science is a subsect of human movement science, which looks at sporting movement. Dance science looks at dancing movement, which now takes into consideration the aspect of creativity and the aspect of pushing your joints beyond what they're really meant for, because different forms of dance have different forms of expression and require us to move in different ways, which we don't generally do. They require our joints to go through a range of motion which we may not necessarily be prepared for daily. Or
is it a foreign movement?
When it's not a foreign movement, but it is not something that we learn to do as part of our daily life. It's not part of our developmental movement learning, so to speak, right? Dancing itself has a whole process of motor learning and motor skill execution, which is not something that we pick up in our daily developmental stages, but it adds on to that rather than just that. So dance science takes into account the creative aspect of it, the extreme expressive aspect of it, because dance is also a visual thing, right? So you are conveying a message, and the message that is being conveyed, for it to be perceived as you want it to, it will need grandeur expression. So you are moving out of your way, or out of what you regularly do, even if, as let's say in Bharatanatyam, something as simple as doing a puja or expressing what we call bhakti, requires you to be extraordinarily emotive.
That's true.
And also move in a grandeur manner to communicate that sense of bhakti or emotion. So because dance is such an expressive form of movement, it also requires your body to be all that more expressive than you would probably be in your day-to-day life or regular life.
But I recall the conversation you and I had a little while ago where you had mentioned that the traditional Indian forms of dance, people grow into it in the sense that they would have done it by the time they would crawl and walk.
Absolutely.
So would that have made it easier for them to have the kinds of movements you refer to?
Absolutely, because interestingly, movement dictates our structure, and our structure then goes on to dictate our movements. It's a cycle. So when you're developing, and traditionally in Indian classical dance forms, you start very young, and that's how it is traditionally taught. You go into the dance form at a very young age. So your body sort of develops to accommodate that movement, because you start at like age 4, age 5, when you are mostly cartilage, not set in bone like you and I are at the moment. And how you move dictates how you develop structurally as well. So in a sense, they do grow into it, which makes it easier for them to express or do these movements. But I think there is also the flip side to it, because your body is enabled to predominantly do only those kind of movements.
So are you, I'm just wondering, if you learn Bharatanatyam, let's say from the age 4, this is all on the assumption that somebody is actually doing it for the sake of hobby and not career.
Right.
But as a livelihood, I'm sure you're not going to be switching from Bharatanatyam to ballet to Kathak.
Correct.
So one you take, you choose, you develop, and you essentially live with it as you go along, because it's a constant evolution, and how you are during maybe your Arangetram at the age of 13, you are certainly so much, you're certainly somewhere else by the time you're 30 or 25, because you've practiced so much. But assuming in the case of a hobby, so if at a young age you're dancing and you start with Bharatanatyam, and somewhere along the way you find this new fascination for, let's say, Kathak, and to the undiscerning eye, you would imagine that the mobility work would be more or less the same, because the hip is moving the same way, the head is also moving the same way, the shoulder also moves the same way. And by and large, people believe a muscle is a muscle and a ligament is a ligament. And from what we have understood with other patients or other clients at Activity Heals, is that while the muscle is a muscle, it may not be triggered, it may not be activated, and there might be no innervation at all. So the nerve has not been triggered to catalyze or do something with the muscle or movement. So in this particular case, could I do that? I start at the age of 4 and I'm doing Bharatanatyam, and then I easily flow into, say, Kathak?
Some of it would be easy. I wouldn't say you'd entirely easily transition to Kathak, because the demands of the style are in some ways similar, but some ways different as well. Bharatanatyam is a very geometric, structured movement expression. Kathak is more fluid, so to speak. It involves a lot of turns, it involves fluid movement of your hands, of your foot. Although both involve footwork, which involves tapping of the feet, how you move in that tapping of the feet differs from Kathak to Bharatanatyam.
Okay.
So while you may be able to carry forward the emotion of it, because they all come from very similar roots of being Indian classical dances, the demands vary quite a bit as well. So what muscles you're probably using predominantly in Bharatanatyam may not be the same muscle groups that you would have to use and as much in Kathak. So there is definitely some sort of tweaking process, if I may call it, for us to transition to another dance form. In fact, now it is very common for dancers to practice different dance forms to ensure that they are not being set in a mold, so to speak, so that it's called what we would say cross training. That
okay, sorry, go ahead.
What you would call cross training, so that your body is not just used to doing Bharatanatyam, which is it's not used to moving only one certain way, but it can also move in other ways, like Kathak.
Okay. If I may.
Yeah.
From what I understand, that perhaps in my observation, is probably that 8 out of 10 people would not be able to move the toe independent of other toes without practice and without focus and concerted effort to do so. If that is true, and if we have a dancer, and assuming that they're in the same population of the 8 out of 10, even if they were to do other dance forms, if they're unable to trigger the toe, which actually would activate your glute and then whatever else, that marvelous things that it does, would they be getting the benefit of this cross training, so to speak, of dance?
No, which is where I think dance science comes into picture.
I see.
That is the bridging gap, or that is bridging the gap for people to enable to move better, not in just their dance form, but also in any other dance form that they decide to do. So even though you're doing Bharatanatyam, and even though you're doing Kathak or Odissi or even ballet for that matter, if you're unable to move your big toe like you said, or open your hip out as much as you would in an Aramandi in Bharatanatyam, you're still not doing justice to the way you're still not doing justice to the way that you're moving, because you're probably you will move because your body is built to move.
Correct.
It'll ensure your brain will do everything in its power to get you to do what you wanted to do. But are you doing it the right way is the question. Is the right sequence of muscles being triggered? And why this is important is because these become the breeding ground for injuries, so to speak. The incorrect sequence of muscle firing, the incorrect sequence of force being distributed when you're dancing. These are what we call as injury risks.
Such as? Well, what's an injury that a Bharatanatyam dancer might endure at a low pain level? And then what would be an example of like is excruciating?
In any Indian classical dance form, I think as a population, we have accepted that lower back pain and knee back pain is part and parcel of the practice. Most of us at some point.
What is that, like a bearable pain? Like it's nagging, it's there with you.
It's there with you. So it starts off as something, oh, I just finished class, there's a little bit of pain in the knee or the ankle. I'll rest it, I'll deal with it. The body is amazing, recoups, you go back. You do the same thing tomorrow. You do the same thing for a week. The pain now
has gotten worse.
But you don't really know what's happening.
But the pain remains even when you're not dancing.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll reach that stage, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. You'll reach a stage where the pain becomes your friend. And you
What a nasty friend.
And you make accommodations like wearing a kneecap. You're probably not stomping as hard or doing your steps as vigorously as you once did, because your body can now no longer really deal with the repercussions of that kind of movement. So directly or indirectly, you're adapting yourself to move with the pain, which is where I think the understanding of movement science as applied to dance comes into play, helping dancers gain more insight into what they could be really doing to get rid of the pain than befriend him and live with him, or it. So to speak.
So this is that's one example of a bearable pain, nagging back pain. I'm sure over a period of time that pain would have either descended or ascended in the human body till a stage where it occupies most of the human body because of the interconnectedness from toe to the head. What's an example of, I don't know, is there a serious injury? I can break a leg or my neck playing rugby or cricket. What can I do here to really hurt myself?
You can tear an ACL. You can dislocate.
While dancing?
Absolutely. What I think part of the problem is that we don't necessarily look at dancers as athletes. Dancers are no less than athletes. It's just a different kind of movement or force generation, so to speak. You see ballet dancers spinning around. You see Bharatnatyam dancers spinning around like crazy. Kathak dancers who are jumping. You have Odissi that has intricate footwork.
True.
Although it may not be as straightforward as having an impact injury like in a rugby where you're knocked off and you break something, overuse injuries are more common. The nagging pain, you continue dancing on the nagging pain. After a point, something snaps. So you would see overuse injuries more commonly in dancers than acute traumatic injury, but that's not to say that they are not prone to injuries. In fact, studies have shown that at least 70% of Indian classical dancers at some point have had an ankle or a knee issue that has put them out from dancing.
But that's interesting. Like if you did that in sports, you would get yourself fixed.
Yeah.
Why won't people do that here?
I think because of the recreational nature of how dance in itself is seen, because it's an adjunct to your life, right? It's an adjunct to a whole other lifestyle that you may have. At least if you're a recreational dancer, you are going to work, you're going to school, and you're practicing dance. Now, from my experience, what I have seen is when you develop this pain and you go to someone to talk to them about it, you would assume you'd go to an orthopedic or a physiotherapist. Physiotherapists will teach you some exercises. You do it, you may find relief, you may not find relief. Then if you don't find relief, who do you have to turn to? You have the orthopedic to go to. Then you go and ask him what's happening. And more often than not, the advice you're given is rest, being away from dance, or take it easy. Why do you need to, continue dancing? Choose another form of dance that is probably not as
taxing.
Choose something lighter. So the solution is never how can I get back to dancing, but
How to sidestep
yeah,
this.
how to take it more easy, so to speak. Which is what was my major trigger point for taking up dance science to begin with. Because I don't think we have to, because there is no reason for us to stop dancing, right? Just like we enable sports people to do everything that they want to do, we do everything in our power to get them back onto the field. Dancers should receive the same care. We should be able to do everything in our power to keep them continued dancing for longer.
Even if we believe that, let's take the population of, there are two kinds of populations, right? One is the population who have considered dancing as their career.
Correct.
And I would imagine that they would go the extra mile to fix
Yes.
what's happened because their livelihood depends on
Correct.
it. And because it's a form of personal expression, I can't imagine the defeat or the failure to go as far as you can possibly go is far more unbearable than you not making the finals team in a sport, because it's a team sport, whereas dance is just you, and it's the imbibing of everything that surrounds you. So let's just, for this particular discussion, or for this moment, we can consider dance as a hobby, and those who get injured or prone to injury. It's like these boys and girls who live in apartment complexes. They want to go play volleyball, tennis, and if they hurt themselves, they'll fix it because they want to go back and play, because it's their way of coming alive. And I'm sure that's the case with dancers too. So what is it about? Is it something about the psyche that if it doesn't hurt me, then I'm not doing it right? Or if it doesn't pain, then it doesn't mean that much to me?
Yeah, I think, like I previously said, you've accepted pain as one is part and parcel of dancing, and also as an indication of you're doing great in terms of,
Oh, I see.
Oh, you are at it. Because the prevalence is so high in dancers, you see a teacher in pain.
Constant pain, I'm sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's what you're essentially almost looking up to. It's you're tiring yourself, pushing yourself to a point where you're in pain. You look beautiful on stage, but what happens after you get off? How are you then going about your daily life? But it is seen as a marker of excellence rather than a red flag or a marker of concern, right? So you patch it up, you do what you need to do to get on stage, perform, look excellent, come back and live with the pain and nurse it.
So how does one help a dancer to go from, if it ain't hurt, you're not doing it right, to fix where it hurts so you have a chance to do it right? Because I'm sure you'll do more if it doesn't hurt. You'll dance better,
Absolutely.
you'll dance longer,
Correct.
you'll work towards improving yourself. So is that a mental block, or is that a cultural understanding? Would you be an outcast if you were to go get your knee or ankle fixed because it's hurting, because you've moved beyond the tenets of social norm?
I think there's been a big shift, at least in the recent times, because of the emergence and exposure to the wondrous things that our human body can do, and how there are different people who can enable people to do all that they want to do. I think previously there was a stigma, and also the lack of access to people who could get you to keep dancing longer, because I think the biggest fear of trying to get it fixed was them asking you to stop dancing. You go seek help, and the best help that you'd probably get at an extreme stage is telling you need to take a back seat now.
Sorry, would that be true of male dancers too? Would they get the same story?
Yes, they would get the same story too.
Interesting.
They would get the same story too.
Okay.
And also because the majority of people practicing Indian classical dance are also women. the number of people practicing, or at least the number of men practicing Indian classical dance, is a significantly lesser population
Smaller,
in comparison to the women. So you would on an average see more women getting injured just because of the sheer number of women practicing it as opposed to men.
So even the medical fraternity wouldn't see this as a
Because they
as a
wanted-
sport or as an athletic performance.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's not really athletic, like I said. You don't see them as an athlete or a sports person. You see them as a dancer, and that's great, but then that comes with its own stigma and differentiation from being an athlete. It's just not as serious as football or cricket, let's say. I don't think you just get taken as seriously as you would if you were a football player or a cricketer than if you were a dancer.
Okay. Given that our dance forms are very, how should I say, ancient in a good way, hundreds of years ago, that when it was formed and propagated and popularized, there were certain realistic factors, very similar to in the olden days where we only ate the vegetables and the fruits that were in season. You know, you mentioned arch development, and you keep hitting the floor, and maybe the individual may not develop the arch in its natural trajectory. Surely this is not a 20th century problem. We were pounding the floor back then, so I don't know if maybe they were pounding mud, so it wasn't so bad. Maybe they were all bare feet also, walking bare feet, so I think that would have contributed a great deal for the arch development. But tell me something, so what if the feet is flat? What's the big issue? I would imagine that there is more surface area to plant. No? So what's wrong with having flat feet?
Well, we have arches for a reason. So the arch is like our suspension, so to speak. It's one is it absorb. Okay. We have an arch for a reason. So the arch is designed to distribute forces, or the ground reaction force that we spoke about, the right way across the body. It dictates how force travels and is absorbed through the chain, through your kinetic chain. So having an arch, one, has a direct implication on how the forces get distributed. So, which now means your inside of the knee is taking a lot more force than it needs to. Like someone with an arch has a better predisposition to directing the forces the right way rather than someone who does not have an arch. That's one simple thing. But that also has structural implications because we are bones stacked on top of each other. So, and our primary point of contact is our foot and ground. Having flat feet predisposes people to having pronated ankles because your ankle sits on top of the foot. Having a fallen arch means your ankle is kind of turning in now. It's not sitting the right way, which means your knee is now probably caving in and not where it needs to be positioned. That has an implication on how your pelvis is sitting. If your pelvis is not sitting right, your spinal cord is not sitting right. If your spinal cord is not sitting right, your shoulders are drooping or not sitting right. So, as is, having flat feet predisposes you to structural disadvantages or structural mispositioning, so to speak. And now imagine doing extreme movements like dance
with this
predisposed structural complexity or misalignment.
So in this, so if we were to take women dancers, let's assume we would take women dancers with flat feet, and all this misalignment will occur, or postural misalignment. Does that have a bearing on pregnancy?
Oh, absolutely does. One is pregnancy already predisposes you to having flat feet. Like you now, it's very common for pregnant women to develop flat feet, which further puts you at, one is you may have perfect arches, dancing has probably weakened it, and now you're going through a pregnancy which is already having an implication on your fallen arches.
But it almost sounds like if you have a nice arch, you should never walk again. Because if you walk, you have flat feet. If you're pregnant, you have flat feet.
That's where bare feet walking comes into play. Our foot was designed to move, not be stationary. But we have added layers to our feet that makes them not as mobile or as
they ought to have been.
intuitive or as sensitive as they have ought to been. So it's really, you should walk. In fact, you should walk as much as you can, but that should be with directly on the ground. You need to have that direct contact with different surfaces,
Sure.
which is what gives the feedback to our brain to trigger the right muscles even.
Sure.
So you're on shoes all the time, or you're in sandals. One is the shape of your sandals also has an important bearing on how your foot is. Very interestingly, in China back in the day, small tiny feet were the thing. So women at a young age were stuffed into these 3 feet
Teeny
tiny shoes so that their foot would actually take that shape. So as you develop and you're constantly in that 3 foot or 3
inches
yeah. footwear, your foot doesn't develop beyond the 3 inches. So you're like that.
So it's very disproportionate, right?
It's very disproportionate. So now imagine wearing pointy shoes, shoes that don't let or take shape, the natural shape of your feet, which are not wide enough. You see bunions so commonly these days because people are wearing closed shoes with narrow ends. So your foot now has taken the shape of the footwear, which again, that is not what it was meant to be like.
And the bunions are what? Because you're wearing the shoe and it's pushing your toe in and the bone here is jutting out?
It's pushing it in, which means your natural gait mechanics is thrown off. It's important for us to use our big toe to propel forward and propel forward the right way. You need to be able to toe off, which is use your foot and your big toe rather to push off. But imagine you being here and you're trying to toe off. There is no way the foot can do this.
There is no toeing off.
There is no toeing off.
Right.
There is something else of you're probably using the balls of your feet or only one side of your big toe. And that's how the force gets directed in your body. And you're, like I said, we are adaptable. Our human body is extremely adaptable. So if that's how you continuously move, your body adapts itself to help you move like that. But there is only so much or so far you can go moving like that. And that's where the structural changes, the further implications of injuries come into play.
Okay. You know, you've worked on, you've been with Activity Heals now for nearly 2 years or a year and a half, right? And you've worked with various people, normal people. You worked with, I believe you're working with a state level swimmer. She's not swimming now, I believe, but I think she's had an injury. You have worked with someone who has had a very complex case of jaw disorder and injury as a consequence of sport. You had a small workshop as well for dancing and for dancers. And I think 1 or 2 people from there were able to see the benefit of what you were talking about. So you've had a kaleidoscope of exposure in human movement science, from normal people to ex-state swimmers to a person who is currently wanting to play football. So he's basically gone from football, injury, rehab, now back to football. And then you have dancers as well. So you've seen a very interesting spectrum and rather strenuous use and strenuous pressures on the musculoskeletal system. What were some of the, or walk me through what you experienced with the dancers and how you were able to use some of the discoveries that you made elsewhere with the non-dancers, other sports guys, that you were able to use or use with the dancers? I mean, it also could be, many a times I've observed that clients themselves are not in a position to understand their own pain. They know that they feel the pain. 9 out of 10 times I've observed people cannot describe a pain. It's pinching, pulling, tweaking, cutting, wringing. So most of these things they're not able to describe. And many a times I have seen that in your line of work, it is so important for you to be able to get them to appreciate that. Because if they cannot tell you if it's wringing or pinching or it's like a tack being put through their skin, you don't know what that particular tendon, ligament, muscle is doing.
Correct.
And if that's the case, you don't know which part of the body you need to tweak. Correct. Whether it's the knee or the ankle or maybe my jaw. So just walk me through some of your exposures and experiences with the dancers, having had the kind of experience that you have in human movement science areas.
Sure. Fundamentally, like I said, I have working with, I think, a wide range of movement practices, which is be it swimming, sport, different kinds of sport, football. I think one major difference, let's begin there, that I've seen with people who play sport and people who play dance are the fundamental demands of these movement practices. Sport requires you to be tense, rigid. The muscles have to be taut in tension to fire like that. But with dancers, there's a different angle to it, because we are not dance is a more fluid expression or more fluid movement in comparison with sport. Dancers need length and strength. They need, when I say length, mobility or flexibility, but strength in that flexibility. They need to be able to stretch out into a star, but still be strong in that stretching out. So how you would train for being a better dancer is vastly, not vastly, but it is slightly different from how you would train to be a good footballer or a cricketer. You work your muscles through the end range. That is, you will have to take your joints through the entire range of motion and make it strong at every point and every length that you can go to. And also, like I said, I think the activities of daily life, like I had a dancer who was 60 years old, who I worked with, who had developed a heel spur, which is basically a bony growth that happens as consequence of constant pressure. And that can be really painful. She couldn't really stand for too long. She couldn't put weight on her heel. And this is because of other injuries that she had really suffered. You know, she had happened to have tripped and fell that kind of affected her knee, which then translated to her having problems with the ankle, and over time developed into a spur because she continued dancing irrespective of all of these injuries. So then how do you now look at, one is correcting her basic movement mechanics and then enabling her to further dance from there. Being able to do daily life activities like walking around, standing, sitting without pain, then translating that and taking it up a notch to help them dance. So I think at the baseline, working with all sorts of movements, there is one baseline that you achieve. There are some things that you have to do across board, irrespective of the movement practice. But I think for dancers, we fear exercises and strength a lot because we are always constantly scared of losing that suppleness in our body or that fluidity in our body, which generally is not the fear with sports guys. They're ready to go at it. They're ready to lift weights because that's what that tautness is what they need. But dancers shy away from practicing like that because they're scared of losing that flexibility, so to speak. But what a lot of us don't understand is strength, flexibility, and mobility are two sides of the same coin. And that's what you train for when you're training outside of class. That is to be strong and long.
Is it the same thing as saying that women with muscles are not feminine?
Essentially, it's a misconception, I would say. And it's also a misconception how, I think even 10 years ago when I went to the gym, they said don't lift too much weight. You'll start looking like a man. You'll become too muscular. But we are just not built the same, women and men. We work out to become stronger. And how your muscle develops is not necessarily, if you're looking at becoming bulky, just lifting weights doesn't make you a chunky little or a big
or a beefed up person.
Yeah. It makes you stronger, which is exactly the misconception that strength training for dancers has as well. They think if you're going at it at the gym, you now are unable to look as supple, as feminine, as graceful as you were if you were just doing flexibility or stretching, which is where we kind of go wrong. Eccentric strength, in my opinion, is a very important factor for dancers, which is again being strong and long.
This I would, any movement apart from, even for walking for that matter, the walking, basic lifting, backpack, you're putting something in the overhead cabin in an airplane, you're taking some boxes off a shelf and putting it back there. There is a certain integrity of the core, which is what allows you to do the things you can do. And it also, it provides limits that I can only do 3 kilograms of something up to a certain angle, elevation, and that's it. Beyond that, something's going to collapse. My back, my hip, my shoulder, I don't know, could be anything. And there comes a time or a range that I will hurt myself. Small niggle here and there, I'm doing this, I overstretch myself, that's not a big deal. And that has a lot to do with the core. And the core determines the duration or how much you can exert your body. Now the core is the same, whether I'm a rugby player or I'm a dancer.
Correct.
The emphasis or the stress that I place on the body, whether it's in the lower body or the upper body, it's proportional to my core strength. If there was a way of leveraging a Newton force on, let's say, me playing rugby versus me dancing, the Newton force still exists. It's just the value of the force would differ. Because I will have 200-pound people to ward off, where I don't have anybody like that in dance. What I'm trying to get at is that there is certain irrefutable, undeniable commonality in terms of whether it's fitness, mobility, strengthening, whether it's a dancer or not. And I may not see it as a dancer, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So just to try to understand here, yesterday we were talking of, what was that? Banda, was it? What was that?
Correct.
How do you say that?
Banda.
Banda. Now that may be a term that is specific to dance. But,
yoga.
Sorry, not to dance, to yoga. But it's not a principle specific to yoga. It's a principle specific to the human body.
Correct.
In order for you to exert yourself.
Correct.
Tell me, A, how different is it to a yoga, to a dance, to football? And tell me something about why that's not a focus. Or how difficult is it to get? Not get, you know what I'm saying. How difficult is it to achieve?
I didn't really. Can you repeat that last
Sure.
bit of the question?
So we've established that this is the core,
Correct.
no matter what activity.
Correct.
We've established that the core and the bandha is important for anything that you do. So you
Correct.
have to brace yourself when you lift something heavy.
Correct.
We just don't. That's because we're lazy.
Yeah.
But we need to do that.
Correct.
I need to do that when I jump and grab the rugby,
Correct.
and then I suddenly pivot.
Correct.
If I don't have my core strength, I might as well go home.
Yeah.
Whether it's cricket or anything, it's all the same. So this bandha becomes a particular phenomenon which talks about tightening the core, strengthening the core, and holding it. So you're able to manipulate your body for whichever sport or activity you're manipulating it for. Now for dancers, do they see it? If they do, is there a way of achieving it? Is that a component of dance movement science too?
Dancers definitely see it. Core is something that it gets talked about a lot, even in Indian classical dance. And like you said, without a strong core, efficient, effective movement is just impossible. There is definitely a understanding of, yes, core strength is needed, but I don't think there is enough understanding about the different ways of achieving that core strength. What we do is practice the basics, so to speak, which are the adavus and the steps, which is like the alphabets of the dance, repeatedly as a means to achieve this core strength, so to speak. It's almost, in fact, a lot of people take up Bharatanatyam as a form of fitness as well, because they think, oh,
surely,
yeah. You know, you do Bharatanatyam, I'm going to become stronger, I'm going to become more powerful, I'm going to have a better core, which is true. I'm sure Bharatanatyam practice has effects and bearings on your strength, but if you're not doing it right, how do you know you're exactly doing these basic steps right?
Absolutely.
Right? If you're unable to achieve a turnout in an aramandi, which essentially comes from the hip, your external rotation of the hip has to be really good for you to get into an aramandi and do the steps. Now, let's say you're an office goer, you've been sitting for 8 hours, your hip flexors are quite tight.
True.
You don't necessarily have the hip mobility to get that turnout, but you then step into a dance class saying, okay, this is my redemption. And you're forcing yourself to get into that turnout in dance, which is actually detrimental to the cause than being...
and to your hip.
Exactly, detrimental to the hip than actually adding. You're not really gaining what you think you're gaining, but you're in fact probably doing more damage, because you're now forcing a turnout, which means your hip is going into an arch and your lower back is getting screwed in essence. So I think, which is where practices outside of just Bharatanatyam or any other Indian classical dance form come into play. How do you ensure that you're doing what you need to be doing in Bharatanatyam the right way? One is being able to express yourself express yourself well, and also get the right benefits out of the dance form, if that's what you're looking to get out of practicing that dance form. So this element of using external practices to better your dance form is not something that is very common here, so to speak. Of course, there is yoga. Because of how rooted in tradition yoga is, most Indian classical dancers in some form or the other practice yoga and believe that is the be all and end all of any practice outside of class, which if practiced the right way is true, because yoga in itself is a lifestyle. It's not just getting into a pose, or it's not just stretching, right? Yoga is a way of life. So only if you're practicing or imbibing all of those practices to its truest essence will you really even take the necessary benefit from it that can translate to your dance practice, like holding a warrior's pose, so to speak. Pretty much most of us can get into warrior pose, but now how do you make this simple? How do you get the maximum benefit or derive what that pose is intended for? You'll need to hold your core, you'll need to ensure that you're grounded better, you'll need to, the bandhas that we spoke about, you will need to incorporate all of these finer elements into that simple warrior pose for you to get the true benefit of that warrior pose. Otherwise, it's not much different from you doing a regular stretch, like a hamstring stretch or a calf stretch. So then essentially you're just stretching and going back into class, which you would anyway do.
So I can tell you to strengthen your bandha then. Why can't I do it? Or why can't you do it if I just tell you? Is that a motor skill?
It is a learning process, right? Any movement other than the developmental movement that we learn it's learned for the body. It's not natural. A lot of it is not natural. So you learn different kinds of.
So this is not natural, this bandha thing?
Actually, interestingly, bracing, which is what the bandha is essentially, comes to us naturally. When you cry, you brace. When you sneeze, you brace.
It's involuntary.
It's involuntary, exactly. So it is innate, but it is not a voluntarily called upon action. Okay. So that requires active practice and exercise for it to almost become involuntary when you're doing the bandha. So if it takes a certain amount of conscious practice of bracing and bandha for it to become a more involuntary practice in, let's say, Bharatnatyam or even in yoga itself. So there is definitely an aspect of motor skill, motor learning, because your brain now has to understand that it needs to fire the core and keep it tight while you're flaring your hands around and jumping around.
Of course.
And that essentially is motor skill acquisition. So you break down bigger movements to its more basic steps. Like I said, the turn, like getting into an aramandi involves hip turning out, pelvis being neutral, as bending down with all of these structures in place. So now you break down the aramandi into smaller sets of movement and you train these pieces and then put them together for you to dance effectively.
Now you make it seem like it's just I put the headlights and I put the engine and I put the axle and I got a car. And but I'll ask this question twofold. One, do dancers are dancers consciously aware that there is a difference in posture from dancer 1 to dancer 2 to dancer 3? That's the first question. You answer that first and move to the second one.
I think that identification is definitely there because it's right in front of your eyes. You see one dancer being different from the other. Let's say one is able to get into a deeper aramandi than dancer 1 is able to now get into a deeper aramandi than dancer 2. Let's say dancer 1 and dancer 2 are able to achieve the same depth of aramandi. Is their hip, their leg, their foot sitting the same way? These are all very visual things that you can see right away.
That maybe you're just lucky because you have a nice posture than compared to me.
Which is what it is written down to ultimately. So they see it, but they don't necessarily understand why there is a difference. Or
so technically I could do that just as well as you.
Yeah,
if I were to work on
more often than not. Other than some predisposed factors such as where your thigh bone or the femur is sitting in relation to your hip. There are some structures that you're born with. People have wider hips, narrower hips, different positioning of the thigh bone or the femur in relation to the hip. They to a certain extent dictate how your posture can look, but it wouldn't really vary
So drastically.
so drastically. It's something that you can still work with.
But in order to achieve the range of movement, let's say that you can achieve because of your blessed posture, and some of us have to do more work, and if I were to work on those, so my range of movement would also be there.
Correct, exactly.
Right? It just made it easier for you to have because you had a posture of that sort.
Exactly. It's not that it's not achievable for you. You can also definitely achieve the same posture, but you just need to identify what you need to do to achieve that posture.
That would be within the ambit of dance movement.
And that is exactly where dance movement science comes into picture.
It seems pretty evident to me that the human body is the human body. And whatever aspects of the human body, whether it's the bone, the muscle, the ligaments, the nerve endings, the tissues, they all work in a similar way. It's really a matter of will that when we take into consideration the motor control and the motor skill, we want to dance, and therefore the movement, the range of movement is this. I would rather just play soccer and my range of movement is this. I wish to do nothing and therefore my range of movement is something else. That said, it is appearing to me that there is a certain, not a mental block, but perhaps a deeper inquiry that in the case of dance, while the movement is as rigorous as anything else, because there is a certain range of motion that your body can do on its own, and there's a certain range of motion that your body is trained to do. And in dance, the range of motion can be quite severe, and it can be, you're changing your hand directions while you're midair in some cases. And then you land, and then you have the core, and you have all these factors at play. So it appears to me that there is some sort of a lack of awareness, if you will, that there is something that you can manipulate, or you can, in a good way, and leverage your muscles, ligaments, tendons, nerves, to get the body to do what you want it to do, and when you want it to do. It would appear to me from our discussion that there's a lack of awareness or understanding that there is something for the human movement science for dance, or a movement science for dance. So if I were to ask you, if I'm a dancer, what is it that I would have to qualify or ask myself or experience to feel that I need help from someone like you? So for example, I know when I go to bed and my tooth hurts, I need a dentist. I'm flossing my teeth, I feel sensitive, crap, dentist. I'm chewing something and the tooth comes off, definitely dentist. So what are those triggers, or what are those little things that I would have to experience to say, I might be in need of a movement specialist for dance?
Sure. There are actually two aspects to this, to dance science or human movement science. One is, what can you do for you to not feel those indicators? How do you prevent yourself from getting to a stage where you're having these aches, pains, and niggles? That is the preventative aspect of it. What can you do as practice or daily practice, or as part of your curriculum or dance class, that will now enable you to not feel these triggers here and there?
But we had agreed earlier that if it ain't hurt, then I ain't working it.
Correct. So that's what I'm trying to explain, is the multifacetedness of human movement science or dance movement science. One is becoming aware of what you can do to not get to that stage. And second, to answer your question, what really are some of the things that may be red flags, or that may be indicators that you may need intervention. Let's say at the end of your dance class, you find your foot throbbing or hurting. You wake up the next day with a little niggle in the lower back. you wake up with a niggle in the knee. These are some common indicators where I think the simplest way to put it is, if you feel like you're feeling a pain somewhere, and you see that persist across 2 or 3 classes, I think that's a great indicator to know that you may need intervention. Second is performance aspects, wherein I am unable to get into a Purna Mandi, which is go down fully while being in a turnout. I'm struggling to get up from there. I am kind of falling forward when I'm trying to get up from the fully bent down position to up. That is an indication that you may need some help or external intervention to prevent you from getting to a stage where you're feeling the small niggle aches and pains, and then which compounds into bigger issues. So there can be physical, postural, structural indicators like not being able to do a certain step efficiently, not being able to achieve a certain jump height that you were probably achieving 5 months ago or a year ago. And the second aspect is pain. Pain is a fairly straightforward indicator that an intervention is needed. Let's say you're experiencing crackling in the knee, which is a major concerning factor for lot of dancers, especially Indian classical dancers. It may be worth getting checked out. Just a crackle in itself is not really much. It is not an indication of damage at the knee, but it certainly is an indication that maybe something is tight. That's why your knees are now far too close together and they're making sounds. So that's probably an indicator for you to go, let's say, hey, let me just figure out what is happening. Because now you leave it unattended, it develops into an ache. It develops into, let's say, a thinning of your meniscus, because for a long, like hours on end, your knees are rubbing against each other. So that may be a good indicator to get yourself checked out and say, hey, is there something happening? If nothing, it's great, and you'll also understand what you can do to maybe get rid of the tightness. But then if it is something, then you're already a step ahead in working towards not getting injured. It's almost like preventing. Prevention is better than cure, so to speak. So you pick these small changes and differences that you experience, and going to someone to get these, even the slightest of niggle or aches and pains checked out, may be a good place to start to ensure that you're not getting injured in long term. At least what an interesting take could also be like a health checkup that you do.
Yes.
You know, go see a movement specialist once in 6 months or once a year to see if everything is hunky-dory, so that you're not getting to a stage where you're experiencing any of these triggers, you know. You're better equipped to deal. One is understand what you can and cannot do to ensure that you're not getting there, and you're just evading it entirely than now having to experience it and then fix it. So one is these simple trigger points, aches and pains, but as general practice, I think it's also just good to do like a hygiene check, so to speak, or a health check, so to speak.
Fair enough. So all of this put together, we've talked about the traditionality of dance and how it came about, and some of the lifestyle that people led long ago, and the benefits it offered them by way of posture and musculoskeletal system growth. We've spoken of perhaps the stigma that is there with the dancers, or them, you know, becoming more and more fit, and people saying, you know, you're not that feminine anymore. You know, that kind of. I'm obviously oversimplifying it a little bit for the sake of the discussion and illustrative purposes. Given all of this and your experience here, your experience with dancers, you're a dancer also or in the past that you have been a dancer. What could Activity Heals provide by way of something, or by way of a program, by way of anything that would benefit dancers of any kind?
Uh, just
Clearly, awareness is one of them, and education.
Correct.
Clearly.
That's first step.
Right.
And also, we do have a small program that we run for dancers, which one is, okay, I'll read this. So what we can offer to different dancers or people who practice different dance forms, one, like you said, is help them become more aware of the kind of movement they are engaging with, and what are the structural, physiological and biomechanical demands of engaging with these different dance forms, what really in essence is needed from your body for you to be better prepared for these dance forms. And how do you bring about these awareness is through movement, engaging with mobility, engaging with strength, understanding how dancers can train functionally or engage in strength training specifically to dance to help them dance better for longer and be injury free. So one-on-one sessions wherein you do a complete assessment of the dancer, observe them engage in the dance form to identify what are the potential red flags or potential risks that the dancer may face. Help them identify that and help them tackle that before they get to a point of no return. Is something that we can help dancers with.
Okay. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to leave this or end this with something cheeky. And I intend to do that because I see the correlation. You want to buy a car. You want to see under the hood, under the seat, in the trunk. And you want to see what creature comfort it comes with. Apple CarPlay, Android, wireless, with wire, sunroof, panoramic, dashboard display, digital versus analog, AC control, feather touch versus dials. Well, now it's ventilated seats and heating seats. Before you know it, there might be a toilet also fixed into the seat. But we do so much research when we buy something that we use, and we dive deep. This car mileage versus creature comforts, and then we somehow decide that, look, this is all the money I've got, so I'd just rather go with functionality than creature comfort. Why don't we do this for dance? Why don't dancers look at themselves as the vehicle through which they are expressing something and say, I can bend this much, or I cannot bend this much. I can stretch or not stretch this much. I don't have the core. The core is like the engine, right? A Toyota engine will give you life of 400,000 kilometers. But that's your core. If your core is strong, you can dance probably for much longer. You will probably have less injury. You will probably, in all likelihood, you would enjoy it even more because you're less exhausted.
Correct.
Why don't dancers see that? Because their body is the vehicle. Because if they saw it, they would be with a dance movement specialist. Because they would want to tweak it. Whatever is not broken, they will strengthen it. Whatever is not there, they will get it. Whatever is broken, they'll fix it. Why don't they see it that way?
I think it's just, I don't think it's for the lack of not seeing themselves as the vehicle of propulsion, but not having someone to go to actually help them tweak. One is, it's not widespread, like we discussed, it's not really very, who do dancers really go to when they really need to tweak something, right? This big
So
circles back to our discussion of going to a physiotherapist or
I see.
an orthopedic.
And it
There
dies
really-
there.
Yeah, it dies there. Or you look at someone in the dancing community who's probably faced similar experiences, and you learn from or kind of try to pick from what they've done that may have worked for them, and you to try to imbibe that. So there is really no one to turn to get the answers that they're really looking for. And sometimes they don't even know the answer that they are looking for because they just don't have the know-how, or it's just not as, this information is just not as commonly available as it would be for, let's say, a sports person out there. So I think the lack of not knowing who exactly to go to, or not knowing someone like a human movement specialist, or someone like, let's say, someone who has a background in dance science exists and can help them, because dance science or dance movement science as a subject in itself is niche and not a widespread, commonly understood scope of work. So I think it's like I said, it's really not for the lack of them understanding or accepting or knowing that they are the central figures, or they are, it's them.
They're the vehicle.
They are the vehicle of, in this case. It's just that, yes, I understand that I'm the vehicle and I know that I have to work on myself, but how do I really go about doing that?
And where?
That's where the issue lies. I don't think it's definitely not for the lack of them seeing themselves as the vehicle for propulsion or the center.
Oh, you've answered a cheeky question very well, so thank you. This has actually been, I think this is path breaking, because we're taking a look at traditional forms of expression, and much of the art is lost. Part of the art has been compartmentalized in various schools, various training centers.
Correct.
And it's also become very commercial.
Correct.
And as a consequence, much of what really needs to be transmitted is lost.
Correct.
Virtue of time, ignorance, whatever it may be on whosoever's part. So I would imagine that going forward, perhaps the only thing that, maybe not the only thing, but one of the primary things that would keep our dance forms alive is something like a dance movement science.
Exactly. Yeah.
Before we allow the gyrating movements of the jhumkas to take over. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I look forward to another episode where you would be talking about how you would have made this more popular with the dancers.
Definitely. Thank you for having me, Sudarshan.
Thank you very much indeed.